one of the biggest search questions is how to tell my boss I'm pregnant.
Really?
And oh my gosh, so many. Like that's like the number one Google search around. If you do pregnancy and work, this is like the thing that is searched because people feel a lot of pressure that they need to do this. And do you have to disclose? Do you not have to disclose? When do you do this? There's guidance like, okay, you want to get through your first kind of appointment or you want to get through your first trimester. But also it's like, how do you feel and how do you feel in your environment? What if you want to make a career move? You're just worried about fear of perception? Or for me, like I was so much worried about what if there's another loss? I don't want to be judged for that. And I was already so tough on myself. Like that question has like so much weight. And the funny thing is, I would say there's obviously some instances where people have not great managers that we need to work on. But there's so many moments where they felt this relief afterwards. Like one woman said that her boss said to her, if you're half as good of a parent as you are as an employee, that is one lucky kid.
Oh,
Like,
amazing.
can you imagine?
Yeah.
I mean, I got chills when I read it because if that's what people say to their pregnant employees, this is not going to be a point of attrition. This is going to be where you retain people. And by the way, it's true. Like, it's a moment. It's such a small moment within regards to your entire career. But for that person, it is really important.
Stephanie, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Chris.
Nice to see you. Nice to see you. How's life? First time in a role as a CHRO?
Yes.
You haven't run away yet? You haven't run away yet?
No, I just love it. It's fantastic. But there's been a lot going on.
Yeah. How many months has it been now?
Almost 6 months.
Wow.
So I started officially in January. I joined the HR team at the end of last year and then have been transitioning and then officially will fully transition by the end of June. So it's very current.
You've done that. Yeah. You've launched a book. What else haven't you? What else have you got planned for us? Slow down a little bit.
I know. It's I keep looking for us, the July 4th holiday. I was like, all right, so it'll be 6+ months in the job. Like, all right, the book will be out there. My kids will be done with school. So it's also like all of those, this part of the season, I feel like is so busy for all of us.
Yeah, it's crazy. How long has it been since the book's been out now?
2 weeks.
How long did it take to write?
It took 3 years to write. Wow. I started thinking about the idea like 10 years ago. And then I did a TEDx talk like 7 or 8 years ago. And then the book has been 3 years. And 3 years like from starting to work on it with the research and interviews. And then since then, just all the time.
Whirlwind.
Yeah.
And for everyone listening, the book is Carry Strong, an empowered approach to navigating pregnancy at work. We'll jump into that a bit more later, but a lot to unpack. But before we get to that, I want to kind of start from the beginning of the journey. Sure. Like many of the HR leaders that have been on the show, you didn't start in HR. It kind of found you along the way. So take us back for a second. Tell everyone a little bit more about you personally and the journey to where we are now.
So it's amazing. I actually was doing an interview yesterday with someone from my university magazine, and I was talking about how I was a chemistry major in college. I love the sciences, and then I also had had a secondary degree in Spanish, so in language. So it was a combination of like the science and culture, and I really get energy from people. So always, even then, so being in a lab was like kind of tough. It was like, all right, I need to see how I can get out there and be with people. Then my first job, I did a rotational program. So for analytical majors, so biologists, chemists, engineers, and we rotated different roles. And that was in New York. And then I was in the UK actually, and we talked about that. And then I was in Asia and I came back to the US. And every time I feel like it was, the joy of kind of the art and science coming together. I was working at a fragrance house. So fragrance houses make a lot of the different fragrances and flavors that are in so many of our products that we have, all of us. But it was really being fueled by being around people and different cultures and adventure. So I feel like I'm exactly where I need to be, where I'm working for a large global organization, in the US, but also with the art and science coming together in the world of beauty.
Amazing. And how long have you been in the role now? I mean, at LOreal for?
At L'Oreal for almost 13 years. So in
Wow.
two different times. So I was at the fragrance house and then I joined L'Oreal and worked on one of our fragrance brands. So we have a portfolio of four different divisions and one of which in our luxury division had Ralph Lauren fragrances. So I worked on Ralph Lauren
Nice.
fragrances. Then I worked in hair care, which gave me a little bit more of kind of the lab piece connected in the brands. And then actually left the company and I also worked at Chanel in the US. And then I rejoined L'Oreal and Kiehl's, so super skincare
Mm-hmm.
fan. And then from Kiehl's went to SkinCeuticals, which is one of our brands in our L'Oreal dermatological beauty portfolio. And then I joined HR. So my experience, fortunately, at L'Oreal has been across the different divisions, but also had the chance to work with our labs and work with our manufacturing sites and work with our HR teams really closely in a lot of different capacities. So for me, that's kind of my pride that I'm bringing to the role, which is this understanding and appreciation for all of the different jobs we have across 11,000 plus employees and across
Yeah.
the US and obviously part of the global team, which is so cool.
Well, you must have enjoyed it because you boomeranged back into the, into
Yeah,
the, into the
exactly.
business. During that journey, what were some of the roles that you held? Because you had a
Actually, I've always been in marketing.
okay.
Um, so I've worked in kind of consumer marketing and the research side of it, and then was really close to product development, which is my favorite. And then worked in general management across the teams. My favorite role was actually when I was running the US business for one of our brands because I loved working with the sales teams. It gives me tremendous amount of energy to kind of drive for the results, but as a team together. And it's funny because somebody asked me that the other day. They're like, I never thought about marketing and HR. And I was like, it's all about communication. You can have all of these
100%.
amazing programs and you can have all of these incredible initiatives, but people have to know about it. And it's how do you get them engaged and feedback and all of that. It's that's kind of a secret superpower of knowing marketing and joining
100%.
HR.
It's for years
Yeah.
now we've been talking about this sort of that intersection of marketing and HR. So no
Yeah.
no no surprise that wealth of knowledge and experience is definitely going to come in handy. So
Right.
how does someone go from being a marketing leader to a CHRO, a HR leader? How did that happen?
Well, I mean, for me, very fortunate to have had the experience within the different brand teams, both on the global side and on the US side. So my role today has a component where it's very closely working, with the global teams and the group, and then also in the US.
hmm
But it's also through the network that I created. So establishing relationships with mentors like Stefan Chabarnier, who I'm
Yep.
replacing, and of course was a guest on your show.
hmm
And I think I always had the curiosity also for a portfolio kind of view of the company, having worked in the different divisions and different functions. It was how could I have a role where I could have that impact for the group. And so it all kind of came together. But at the end of the day, I'm just so excited. It's such an amazing adventure, and I have such a fantastic team. So there's a lot I have to learn. I'm
Yeah.
so in awe of all that this function has done. I think HR, as you very much know, has had such an evolution and has been critical for so many, especially in the past 3 years.
Yep.
I say to the team all the time, I'm like, I'm just grateful to get to be part of this team and to help kind of be the propelling action behind all the great work that's being done.
Yeah. No, you're 100% right. So did someone come to you with this opportunity internally, or did you seek it out? Just out of curiosity.
Yes, came to me.
Wow. What was your first reaction? Be honest.
I fell over in my chair. I well, I like, kind of like really
Me?
did. And then,
No, no, no.
and then, I think I sat with it a little bit and I remember telling my husband and saying like, there's something feels so good about this.
Mm,
And then I also feel like I, later would tell some friends and very close colleagues to me, and they would be like, this is what you need to be doing. And I felt that so much, especially in the past 6 months. Like there's moments where I've been like, yes, this is not just for me and my growth, but like, okay, how can I immediately add value while learning, while growing, and supporting the team in a different way, but also learning from someone who's unbelievable. So it's really a gift,
yeah.
but I'm super humble about it, and I really did fall over, but I'm so committed to the success.
Are you still still got the imposter syndrome, or is it wore off?
No, I have it in moments. So
Okay.
sometimes I'll be reading and it's something really technical, and I'm just like, all right, so do I download the deck and study it later? Do I try to Google what we're talking about? Or do I phone a friend? Which is like, it's like, how do I gather the information?
Yeah,
Like, I'm a very, very good student. I always have been.
yeah.
So it's like, all right, how can I learn this? And then other things that, you're like, I've got this. I've got this. I'm in the groove. But I feel like any job, it takes at least a year.
Oh,
So
of
I feel like
course.
I'm in the thick of it, where there's been moments of glimmers of hope. Or by the way, like, important moments of humility where you're like, you do not know.
Oh,
Do not try to
yeah,
solve
yeah.
this.
That's why you got a great team, right? That's the whole.
Yes, and I'm making a running list for Stefan all the time. Like, all right, so here's all the list. Here's all the things that I'm very aware I do not do, which is
I
cool.
bet you're like, I know you're leaving, but I'm going to call you, right? when I got some
Right,
questions, I'm going to message you when I got some questions. So,
right.
yeah, love it. Tell everyone a bit more about the book. What inspired the book and the journey that you've been on to where we are now.
Yeah. So, I mean, I mentioned a little bit that I'm like a nerd, and I feel like the way that I process things is also often through learning, curiosity, asking questions, and connecting with others. So for me, if I was talking about 10 years ago, but more than 10 years ago, I zoom myself back. We talked about this before, but my husband had done the New York City Ironman race the year after we got married. So just before our first anniversary. And unfortunately, he suffered extreme hyponatremia. So he had imbalances in his electrolytes that were affecting his brain. And in fact, ended up in intensive care for over 2 weeks. And I remember the direction I was sitting, and I say this in the beginning of the book, when I was sat down by the head of a hospital and told, like, it's a good thing you don't have kids. And I'm staring at my, newlywed husband who's super
He
strong,
said that
who's
to
done
you.
this incredible. Yeah. And also, by the way, that I should get a priest if that was my religion, because last rites might be necessary. And I just remember sitting there and being
Wow.
like, where am I and what is happening? And no, he's just coming to get some, dehydration. And it was very, very serious. And so from that point on, I feel like, the idea of family was something that was always important to us. And it was always important to me also personally. Like, okay, I knew I wanted a career, but I knew I wanted to be a mom. That
Mm,
was really part of who I always have been. And I feel like so many of us have that innate. And by the way, that both are possible. And so that happened. And then it took us a long time after that to be cleared from a health perspective, and then to get pregnant. And then I was pregnant, and then I say unpregnant and pregnant again at work. And it rocked me because I was expecting that I had already gone through, or we had already gone through, like, quite a lot to get to this point, and didn't expect that it wouldn't happen. I mean, I think now, obviously, through the work and the research of the book, like, it's not easy. Sometimes it just happens, and that's wonderful. Or, by the way, that can be its own kind of shocking situation. But for us, to suffer a loss at the end of a first trimester at my desk was a moment that I realized, number one, this impact on me of something I really wanted,
mm,
but also that this was an opportunity for me to help others, because, mentorship and talks, communication about these powerful life moments always happen behind closed doors, or you're searching, like you're googling how to tell my boss I'm pregnant, or I'm going through fertility treatments, or what to do if you're suffering a loss. And so I wanted to create a resource. So, from that point, I started coaching people behind closed doors, where I teach at FIT. So I was teaching communications at one of our universities as an adjunct in New York City. And so students, mentees, people would kind of come to me for this advice, but I'm just one person. I have one perspective and one story. So during the pandemic, I saw these amazing, and I'd done the TEDx, and I seen these amazing women who were like in full PPE or with their giant bellies serving on the front lines. It's like, all right, there's something here, because it wasn't just tragedy that I was feeling in triumph post loss and into pregnancy with both of my sons and all the tough stuff in between, but it was also this like boost of confidence. So how could I reframe something that's not just something to get through, which is how it's often framed? It's not true. As it could be positive, it could be neutral, it can be negative, but how do I create a community of support in a way that felt authentic, had the combination of storytelling, had some facts, debunking myths? So I decided to write a book. Like, I thought, instead of having just micro stories. Like, how can I create a comprehensive resource around one topic? There's so many awesome resources for pregnancy, around health, or postpartum return, including work. But I knew there was something like the pre and the during, particularly about career. And
Mm,
so I kind of sought out to work on just this narrow and deep topic, but I know affects, so many women.
yeah. Was part of it that when you went through that situation of losing your baby, that you looked for a resource and there wasn't one there?
Yes, I actually remember two things happening. One was I was using my phone and I was searching through message board threads,
Mm,
remember, like message board threads, to try to see the results. I would look for, like, okay, is there any hope that this is happening? And I feel like for me, that's why it's been so important. And any of the articles I'm creating is it's to make people feel less alone in the information, but also just that it exists. And now
yeah,
there's so much more. I mean, that was 10 years ago. And even, by the way, Google algorithms have gotten better. So I'm sure that there
yeah,
would have been something for me now, which I definitely believe. But how is it credible? How is it balanced? And I really wish that that would have existed. So I'm trying to both create the space for the conversation and also for some of those resources to exist, just to make people feel, safe, included, and less alone.
yeah.
And positive, by the way, and
Of
celebrated at the
course,
end of the
right?
day.
Yeah, of course. Um, how did you? This is obviously a bit of a sensitive question, but I'm trying to figure out how to phrase it. How did you find the courage to try again and build
Yeah,
yourself back up? Because I'm sure that must be so devastating. Um,
yeah.
what? And I asked that because there may be someone listening to this one day that could love to hear those words from you, someone like yourself who's been for it.
I think personally, it's always been something for me that you just have to try. You have to see what you need around you. You have to seek out experts, resources, support, but you also have to find the way you feel comfortable to do that. And in fact, in that moment, I feel like, it was kind of the first time, and so it shocked me, but it was like, all right, of course we'll try again. and
Yeah.
and I remember then later suffering additional losses before my second son, and in fact that was, I had my child, but it actually felt almost as dire, because it was like, of course this is going to happen. Of course I'm going to have to fight through it. But
Yeah.
for me, relatively, there are so many people who are carrying so much, including, by the way, dealing with the trials and tribulations of pregnancy. You could be pregnant at work for 5 years and not yet have a baby. So all I have to say to people that are listening that may be helpful for is give yourself grace, give yourself space, realize that all the other things that you're doing, so by the way, that can be work included, it might be a season where you need to shift that focus and momentum. Or I actually found for me, work was actually a way for me to feel comfortable and capable. I actually got a lot of energy by having things that were within my control in a positive way. I actually enjoyed delving into projects or distractions, especially when I was also, navigating the health of my husband. And the people around me at work became such powerful allies and friends. So I think two things: give yourself the grace in this space, navigate the seasons, get the energy where you need it from other places. Don't feel like everything has to be at once, where
Yeah.
you're like, oh my God, I remember this feeling. And it was really tough. I remember this moment where I was like, I'm failing at work, I'm failing at home, I'm failing as a daughter. And it's not true. You just have to kind of navigate your seasons and feel when those energy dips happen, how you're going to lift yourself up in a different way. And it can come from a lot of different places and people, and surrounding yourself with the people that you
Yeah.
need.
We have a habit of beating ourselves up, don't we? It's,
We so do.
we
So
do,
do.
and at the worst moments possible.
Yeah.
You
I
know,
was launching the book 2 weeks ago, and I don't think I've ever felt as vulnerable. It was really tough.
it's what happens when you're literally putting a piece of yourself.
Yes.
You're literally giving a piece of yourself away. And
Yeah.
it's yeah. Um, so for context for everyone listening, you interviewed over 200, if I get this right, working mothers in the
Yeah.
book, and I've got the list of questions, but won't go over all of those. But one of the things you do is you ask them to share their crucible moment
Hmm.
at work. Could you walk through, share with everyone a little bit more about what that means and why you did that?
Sure. So So one thing I did with the women that I interviewed was I asked them 5 questions. So I asked them, tell me a time about you when you were pregnant at work. It doesn't have to be the moment. You know, a lot of people would jump to like, oh, I don't really have like this thing. But for example, one of the stories is about someone who was pregnant with quadruplets. And someone gave, their parking space to her closer to the door. And it was like a small gesture, but it had such a powerful impact on her.
100%.
Other people, it was, I mean, Poppy Harlow from CNN was interviewing Justice Ginsburg. So, okay, that's a pretty big, powerful crucible moment.
Mm.
But what I found through the stories is there's something that people get zapped back to that individual moment for me. So I talk about the sad one, but I also remember when I was pregnant with my second son, I was on my way home in a taxi up the West Side Highway in New York City after doing my last day at work. And I just given a presentation to our interns. So just imagine like a super giant pregnant person presenting to interns was probably terrifying for them, thinking that I would go into labor. But for me, and I texted, and I still have it on my phone, I refuse to delete it, but I have a note that I sent my younger son and said, I just did this presentation at work and you were with me and I'm so proud and I can't believe this is where we are and tomorrow you're going to be here. And I had a high risk condition, so I knew I had to be induced. So fortunately for the interns, I wasn't going to have the baby. But like those moments we zap back to in our life. And by the way, I'm talking about pregnancy and work, but so many people have those powerful crucible moments in their career and the intersections of life and career that happen. And I asked women to share that because in that moment, the other questions were, tell me, advice you wish you would have had in that moment,
Yeah.
or what advice do you want to give? Because it's something that happens in that moment in a really, really special way.
Did you find when you asked that question that many of the women didn't even realize how impactful that moment was until you kind of brought it up?
Absolutely. I also asked what phase of the journey did this happen to? And by the way, some people that shared their stories, they don't yet have children or they haven't yet been pregnant. So it's even the phase before.
I
And for
see.
so many, by telling them the phases instantly, which I found very helpful actually to delineate these phases because it put words around something that's not medical. It's not necessarily about your developing body or baby. It's actually more your thresholds for what you share, you don't share, and
Hmm.
just how you feel. But for so many, when I talked about, so the phases are BTTC, so pre trying to conceive, could be college age women, or just before you're ready to try, which is the next phase, trying to conceive. Then there's the big positive, and then they're zapped into this moment. For those who don't disclose something right away, I call it the hush. And almost every single person I talked to, and I said that, they were like, oh, yes. Putting words around this fact of this private pregnancy, the before you reveal your news, or just this idea that you have this precious secret. And it can feel like a lot of pressure. But it also has this like secret superpower. So putting words around that, so many people, if they were struggling with this story, I'd be like, well, let me tell you about these
Oh,
phases.
so they can get
And they'd be
they
like,
can have the
oh,
language to have the
exactly.
conversation.
Exactly. So like, okay, that was definitely in the hush, or that was definitely when I was publicly pregnant, when it's a push, or that was definitely when I was thinking about returning to work. And those moments also kind of help to create the light bulb moment for them.
Yeah. What were some of the sort of concerns that came up in that phase of sharing
Yeah.
that they're pregnant?
So it's really interesting. So many people, one of the biggest search questions is how to tell my boss I'm pregnant. And
Really?
oh my gosh, so many. Like that's like the number one Google search around. If you do pregnancy and work, this is like the thing that is searched because people feel a lot of pressure that they need to do this. And do you have to disclose? Do you not have to disclose? When do you do this? There's guidance like, okay, you want to get through your first kind of appointment or you want to get through your first trimester. But also, it's like, how do you feel? And how do you feel in your environment? What if you want to make a career move? What if you, you're just worried about fear of perception? Or for me, like I was so much worried about what if there's another loss? Like I don't want to be judged for that. And I was already so tough on myself.
Mm.
But it a lot like that question has like so much weight. And the funny thing is, I would say there's obviously some instances where people have not great managers that we need to work on. but there's so many moments where they felt this relief afterwards. Like one woman said that her boss said to her, if you're half as good of a parent as you are as an employee, that is one lucky kid. Like,
Oh,
can you
amazing.
imagine? I mean, I
Yeah.
got chills when I read it, because if that's what people say to their pregnant employees, this is not going to be a point of attrition. This is going to be where you retain people. And by the way, it's true. Like, it's a moment. It's such a small moment within regards to your entire career, but for that person, it is really important.
Yeah.
So for me, I try to kind of frame the book in a lot of these stories where you see both and you see what's possible. Like, we're going to continue to have kids. We're going to continue to work. So we don't have to frame it always as this something dire to get through, and we have to recognize when perception and weight that women are carrying, or female identifying birthing people are carrying, because we can also flip the script.
Yeah, that really gives me a unique insight because I'm speaking personally. I'm not going to speak for all men, obviously, but I never felt like that. When
Right.
I had to tell my boss, or actually my boss was Shane, my co-founder at the time, but like I never felt a pressure, and but I can remember Natasha, my wife, being very nervous now if I look back about telling her boss, and she was like, I don't want to be overlooked for this promotion. I don't want to be seen as, there's loads of things that we spoke about beforehand, but it's a very different perspective. um
It's a forcing function, right? So when you have a belly, there's one point where it discloses it for you. And it's really interesting because during the pandemic, the screens were here.
okay,
So
yeah.
people longer to share. And it's funny because I remember having a conversation with someone who said, "Oh, I feel like my husband. Like, I just have to wait until I'm going to be
Oh,
like, oh, by the way, I'm having a baby this week."
that's so
You know,
true. That's how us men operate. Oh, by the way, I'm having a baby. Yeah, we're so
right,
it's so
right.
different.
No physical symptoms. Although, partners certainly still feel like a tremendous amount of pressure and preparation and have to have the discussions. And I feel like it's really interesting because now I think we're very much more aware. I mean, particularly in the US, parental leave is now applying to all genders. So it's different. And hopefully, by the way, will encourage men and the non-birthing partners to participate in a different way, or perhaps need to disclose it to anticipate what might happen at work. Um, so it's an interesting time I think we're in
How's that
about this topic.
shaped the work that you're doing in HR? Because I'm sure you now get to really impact the lives of how many employees do you have now? I always forget the number.
7,000 in the US.
What
Yeah.
big responsibility there.
Oh
So
yeah. Definitely the great power, great responsibility. I feel it. The carry strong has a new meaning in my new job.
yeah,
Um,
what does the current parental leave look like at L'Oreal? What's the
so the fantastic thing is that and I say this very often to people, but I wouldn't have felt so confident in this job if I also didn't believe so much in what we're doing for working parents. And that's for pre paternity, during, the benefits that we offer, and also, afterwards, including, by the way, having a think tank that's for parents and caregivers. So that's one, is that I feel very proud of what we offer. And I just keep telling our teammates, they're like, "Oh my gosh, you're going to do so much for the parental policies." It's like, no, I'm just going to talk about it. It goes to the marketing and communication piece. It's like, no, actually, we have amazing resources. I just need to make sure that everyone's aware of what
yeah.
exists. So that's one. And the second part, which I feel like in the past couple of weeks I've been thinking about so much, is that, you know, talking about these other dimensions of ourselves. So, including being a parent, or being a caregiver, or all of the other things that we do. My goal is also, in me talking about this one facet that, by the way, is very relevant to so many of our employees, but actually is permission to bring your whole self to work in so many other ways, other different dimensions of diversity. And by the
Hmm.
way, that I wrote a book, and that I'm very proud to have done that also concurrent to my career. So I think it's combination of, yes, specifically, obviously, I very much want to support our parents and our caregivers. And I personally, focused on this area that I saw as an opportunity in the big picture. And I believe that we're leading. And so how can I help to lead, even more so than in L'Oreal, but also separately. And I keep hearing it, and I'm so proud of that. it's also, this is just one thing, this is mine, but what are the other ways that are either constraining you or propelling you in your life that intersect with work? So I feel like both of those have been really top of mind for me
Yeah.
in my new job. Yeah.
In the book, you I think it's five principles, right?
Yes.
In the book, and you start with identity, which I think you said, I read somewhere that you said was the hardest.
Yes.
Why did you start with identity, and what does that mean?
So identity was the hardest to write of the principles, and it was the last chapter I wrote. So the principles are perspective, balance, community, communication, and identity.
So identity is the
And
last. Is it the last principle? Oh,
identity
okay.
is
So
the last.
I mix it the other way around then. Okay.
Identity is the last one. I started with perspective because for me, what I realized when I was writing the book and even listening to women is they would frame it still, unless they've gone through it. So the anticipation, people would say like the get through, or pregnancy is a career killer, or, there's even been some things lately where I've been like, no, what, you're continuing to perpetuate this heaviness, where, in fact, like we see that the breadwinner, motherhood penalty and fatherhood bonus, the primary breadwinner, in fact, is actually pretty balanced now. So I debunk some common misconceptions, but that was important to set it up. And then the other principles, which by the way apply in leadership completely outside of this intersection of pregnancy and work, balance, like we all talk about it quite a lot. What does it mean? I give a different way of thinking about it. Communication, which we talked about, is essential. Community, who do you need around you? But the last one, identity, it's not necessarily, I would say it's not as clear as those other principles of like, okay, here's a tool and here's some things you can do. Identity is like deep work. And in this moment, so many people would go back and forth, and myself included, would go back and forth between I'm exactly the same person and I'm a totally different person. And the same person could be saying both things because you're still experiencing it. But yeah, I think
Is
now
that
we're all.
I was gonna say, is that kind of? I just want to stop you there because you kind of just triggered a memory from my wife when at one point she came to me and said, "I don't know who I am anymore,"
Yes.
and I didn't understand it, if I'm being honest. At the time, I was like, "What do you
Yeah.
mean?" And she said, "I don't know." Like she kind of was struggling to find her identity again, and
Yes.
and that's one of the reasons she was really keen to get back into the workspace, into back to work. She's like, I love Robin, obviously, I love it, but
Right.
I enjoy my career. It's who I am. It's what I love to do. And at the time, I didn't really understand it. But now I understand it more because we had more conversations, and she's continued to evolve, and she started her own podcast where she speaks to D&I leaders every day, and it's been actually really proud. I'm proud of her to see her, find herself and really. But is that what you mean by identity as well?
Yes.
Okay.
And it takes some it takes some time, because it takes some time, but it also relatively is pretty quick. You're going through, that's plus or minus a year of something super transformative, where you physically change, you
Mm.
have a baby, you have all this responsibility, but you're who you are. You return to work, and are you the same? Are you different? Things have happened maybe when you weren't there. I mean, I just remember like standing in my closet, like the same moment as your wife, and looking in the closet and being like, who am I? And what do I wear? And what does she do? Where does she go? Or it's also that you have these new priorities, and they're not necessarily bad, but in the moment, you're like trying to learn all of these new things. Like, I really want to go on the work trip, but I can't go on the work trip. But if I don't, it's going to affect my career. But is it really going to affect my career? And my boss says it's not going to, but I feel it is. And you're trying to do all of this like Jenga rationalization of priorities. And then you have this moment where you have a sick child, and you're like nothing else matters. But I found for myself, and when you were talking about, imposter syndrome, or for me, it was a perfectionist mindset that was holding me back, because it was like, I want to get an A in everything. And if I just work harder and I just put in more hours, and if I just say yes to everything, then I can make things happen. And then for me, motherhood and all of those experiences, life experiences, actually has made me so much better at delegating, prioritizing, being focused. I'm so much more focused than I was, I think, because you can't not be. So,
No.
you know,
No.
you don't have a choice when your 4-year-old is pouring things on the floor. But I also feel a tremendous amount of reward I get from work as well by having something that's kind of uniquely me too when I'm giving a lot to other parts of my life.
Yeah. I'm wondering, like, one of the things I experienced, you're kind of taking me back now, and my wife and I, we spoke about this recently, is no one really tells you also how it affects your relationship as husband and wife,
Yes.
as partners. And that's something that I wasn't really prepared for, because all of a
Yeah.
sudden, for the longest time, it's just been you and your partner, and now you have this amazing human being in your life. And I kind of felt like for a while I lost my wife for
Yeah.
a little bit. Not that she was like being intentionally distant, etc. But I didn't. She was kind of trying to figure herself out, which she explained to me later. Because I would be like, "Are we good? Are we good? Like,
Right.
like, oh, have I done something wrong, or like, can I help?" And she said, "No, it's not you. I just need just give me some space. I need some space just to." Figure if that makes sense. I can't even explain it. Right? Hopefully, people can relate to what I'm saying as well.
No,
And I was like, okay, the dynamic of our relationship had also changed, which took some getting used to, if that makes sense.
no, I've heard it a lot with couples. Also, when you're both working, I think you need to have that conversation also when someone's pregnant. Like it's how will this affect my career? How is this going to affect your career? We do it, but we talk a lot more about what does that mean for childcare, or what does that mean for our physical space or our finances.
Mm-hmm.
But it also is important to talk about like what's important for our relationship. And I think regardless, the parent, the birthing parent also has a specific responsibility that often they're the only ones that can care for the child in some instances. And that can feel like a lot, but they also want to. So it's, having the discussion with your partner about how can I help? What do you want me to do for you? And also for the baby,
Mm-hmm.
because sometimes I think that, mothers, myself included, afterwards you're like, okay, I did my job, and and all right, the baby is born, and then you go back to work and you're like, but I did this, I accomplished this other piece too, and you want like some recognition of what you've gone through,
Yeah.
um, and also for yourself. it can
Yeah.
it can feel like a lot. It can be exhausting too.
Yeah. What were some of the other? You mentioned earlier some of the myths that you debunked.
Yeah.
What were some of the other myths that you debunked?
One of the things we talked about that might be helpful for people that are listening is about communication specifically. So, I think that people feel a lot of pressure of what they need to say and how they need to say it. But what I really encourage people to do is think about the person you're communicating to and think about how you like to communicate in order to find kind of confidence and comfort. So, for example, the question that we were talking about, how to tell my boss I'm pregnant. So, how to tell my boss I'm pregnant, it could be very straightforward. It's like, I'm pregnant. This means that this is when I go out on this due date, which means that I want to check in with you here. It can be very straightforward. Maybe that's your communication style, and that's also how your boss needs to communicate to. But it doesn't have to be your boss, and it doesn't have to be not your style. So I use kind of like a who, what, when, where, why. So who do you need to tell? Is it your boss? Is it HR? Is it an ally? Is it a friend? Is it someone else within your ecosystem? What do you need to tell them? So you might not need to say, hey, I'm going through fertility treatments. This means morning monitoring. This means I need you to change my status. This means that I'm not going to be on this trip. That might be one person's style, and that's fantastic for them. And maybe that's also the relationship they have with that boss or HR team member. But it also might just be someone going and saying, hey, listen, I'm going through something personal. It's affecting me every day. I'm going to tell you when I need you. I just needed you to know that something was going on.
Yeah.
you're That's up to you, and that's so important to have that empowered feeling for the who you need to tell, what you need to tell, when and where. Like, is it urgent? Like, do you need to immediately pick up the phone or do a Zoom, or do you want to wait until you have a meeting and you're going to bring this up in a way that you feel comfortable? But the last one is, and the how, and the, is it in person? Is it a quick conversation? Is it in writing? So whatever you need to do for you and based off of the situation. And then the last one is the why. You're doing this because this is something that's important to you. It's affecting your everyday. It's wonderful, or it's something that you're carrying a lot of responsibility. And is it having an effect on you at work or not? And that's also okay. And sometimes I find that framework can be so freeing, and not just for pregnancy and work, but for a lot of the things we're all going through. And sometimes just thinking about who, what, when, where, why, how can take some pressure off, I think, of the situation. And by the way, it's what we should be doing as HR and leaders in general, to create conversation so it doesn't feel like this huge extra responsibility on the person that needs to advocate for themselves too. So I think that's one thing to consider.
So that's a good framework to tell your boss that you're pregnant, to go through
Yeah,
that process,
for anything
or
stuff you're
anything.
going through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Random thought, and I'm not sure if you did. I don't know if you've done any research into this. How do companies like provide training to leaders of how you even deal with that?
So there are some incredible resources and organizations that do onboarding and offboarding for leaves, which I think is fantastic. I also think there's been excellent training done by a lot of HR organizations about critical conversations. But I think this one is very specific. And
Yeah.
I feel like there's an opportunity for us to, which is why I did it in the book, but put it all in one place, because these life moments all kind of need their own playbook. Like I've asked recently someone, like, do you have a way that you recommend someone to navigate, dealing with an ailing parent, or perhaps a child who is going to college? Like, are there these moments where we can
Yeah.
help to give some tools, and what resources available? Because sometimes I think we have all of this stuff that's available, and then we have all the critical coaching conversations that need to happen, and we give that, but we've got to connect the two.
Hmm.
And by the way, I think it's a tremendous opportunity for HR in that role, where we often sit between kind of the coach and the empowering the manager and the employee, but we also have the access to the expertise and the resources. So I think it's an area of opportunity in these life moments, or moments that matter, that we use at L'Oreal to empower the employee and the people manager, because of the power of HR and where it's going as a partner to expertise, and also to the businesses and the team members.
Yeah. Because I remember when one of my employees first came to me, not in this company, when I was a director at a previous company, and said that they're pregnant. I honestly had no idea how to handle that conversation.
Totally.
And I'll be honest,
Right.
I didn't know where to send them. I didn't know what our leave policy was. I didn't know anything. And I felt really overwhelmed. I was like, why have I never been trained or told any of this information at any point? And it just made the conversation, it should have been a really happy, joyful conversation. Whereas I basically left that conversation saying, I'll get back to you, which just felt
Right.
awful.
Right.
Obviously I was very happy for them. I was like, what, congratulations, etc. But I didn't have any of the answers to any of the
Right.
questions which they were really concerned about. Very, very important questions. And I had none of those. I'm just thinking, how many organizations are actually equipping their leaders and managers with that knowledge? Because,
And
yeah.
it's funny. One of the women in the book said that pregnancy at work feels like a series of uncomfortable conversations.
Hmm.
Which is like these uncomfortable conversations. So for me, it's exactly that, which I think is the opportunity. And by the way, you can follow her lead too. Some of the employees are going to know more than maybe you, and they come to you, they're going to be like, I know that I need to call this for this policy, and I know to do
They've done their
this.
research.
And other research, they have it set up, but
Yeah.
it's kind of, it's important that the managers have that information, and
Yeah.
what their role isn't,
Yeah.
what HR role is, and what the employee's role is. Like, okay, this is what you need to do, what I need to do, and what they need to do. And that way we all can kind of, I call it like a deliberate ease. Like, how can we make it so that it's not uncomfortable, it's not awkward? Because by the way, it is physically uncomfortable and relatively awkward on its own. So how can we make at least the conversations and the resources available, and long before you need it? I think that that's so important. And that is, for me, a moment I feel like, we're starting to, or we are embracing these leave policies, tools for onboarding and offboarding, think tanks, employee resource groups. It's all awesome. But that's sometimes, if me, you only are really looking at that when you're like, I need it, versus we have to make sure it's available to everyone, both because I think it's cool because you can support your coworkers, and I want to work at a place where, regardless if I need all of those resources, I know they exist for my teammates. But also, if you know they exist long before you need them, you're going to feel more comfortable and confident going into it, which that's also a huge opportunity to not have to be carrying that extra stress or weight when you're thinking about some really big life decisions. So
Yeah,
I think it's important.
so important. Because I spoke to like friends and family in the past who they said, "Oh no, I'm thinking about having a kid," and they're like, "Oh, but I can't do it because of X, Y, and Z." And I'm like, "Oh, you should go and check if that's the case." And they've come back and said, "Oh my God, no, it's not the case. We have this benefit, we have that, we have fertility, we have." I'm like, they're like, "Great," and then I'm like, "Oh, the fact that you didn't know that." Yeah, it means that the company's failed you in being able to make sure that you shouldn't have to search for it. It should
Right.
be very very easy to access. And like you said, with your marketing background, we should be constantly having those conversations, storytelling, sharing that throughout the organization. So
Even before someone joins a company,
yes,
even having that available, like that's how people are also choosing where they work and not making it weird. Someone asked me that the other day, was they were like, well, how can I ask if somewhere has a maternity policy when I'm interviewing without them thinking that I'm going to need it?
and get
It's like, well,
that's a good point though. That's quite a tough one, that one, isn't it? Yeah,
I mean, I said, why don't you say, where can I find more information about all the policies you offer your employees?
yeah,
And by the way, if they're like, well, we don't really have that, that's also kind of something telling too.
that's true.
Um,
Yeah, so
anyway, it's a matching game, right? We want to have employees that want to join organizations, and organizations want to be attractive to employees. So, I think that there's ways to do it, but hopefully we'll get to the point where all of us can just ask and it's not strange.
yeah.
But I think for the time being, like asking something like that can be super
Hmm.
helpful.
You mentioned that you share a lot of sort of actionable tools in the
Mm-hmm.
book. What's one that comes to mind that you think will be most valuable for our audience listening that they can take away and do tomorrow?
Mm. One thing that came into mind because I talked about it yesterday with someone was, and particularly for HR leaders, I ask people sometimes to think about a traffic light with their career. And it, by the way, can be for your life too. So think about a traffic light. Like, are you green? Are you in the zone? Are you feeling like you're growing, that um, you're getting energy from a lot of places, that you're moving, by the way, that you see green lights with your team, and you know that feeling. Like everybody knows that
Yeah,
feeling. All right,
yeah,
I'm in the green, which is cool. And by the way, sometimes you're in the green with like 90% of your life, and there's like something that's kind of like holding you back. But okay, I'm in the green. Or you yellow, like there's something sticky and it's holding you back, either in career or another dimension of life. But there's something yellow or it's a warning sign, and either you need to like speed up and get through that yellow light, or you're going to slow down. Or are you red? And that's like, get me out of here. Something is not working. Either it's something that's affecting your everyday at work, or it is your work. And I think one reason why I say that is that that's part of an assessment that can happen for all of us, including, by the way, these major life moments like pregnancy and work, but it's for your everyday. And I think that as HR leaders, sometimes the forcing function of, are you green, are you yellow, are you red, help us to understand how to unlock, maybe if you're green, those things that are awesome, we want to make sure we keep. Because one of the fears in these life moments is that you're going to lose something. So how do you capture what those are, and then you keep it going and recognize it? Because it's also kind of amazing when it happens, that you need to enjoy it a little bit.
hmm,
Or the yellow, like what are the things that need to shift, or just recognition of it can be really freeing. And then the last part, if it's red, it's like, all right, we need to do something about this, because this isn't just going to be affecting your work, but this is also going to be affecting your life. So that's kind of one tool that anyone listening, I'm sure you can probably, I use it for myself, where I'm like, all right, today is a pretty good green day. And it can be for a day, it can be for a week, it can be for a year, that you're feeling yellow, like you have this feeling. But sometimes those points of assessment, particularly with the intersections of life and work, I think can be very helpful to encourage a conversation with people too.
yeah. Love that because you can use it in a particular point of time, a particular project, pain point, etc. And it's a good way of
Right.
just, again, it's like to your point earlier, it's a great way to have a conversation
Yeah,
because
exactly.
sometimes it's hard to put it into perspective. Whereas if you have that, you can say, "This is where I am right now. I'm this is I'm in a red right now, and this is the reason. Okay, how do we get you from there to there?" And
Yes.
having a conversation around that. What do you hope that people take away from the book?
I really, it's amazing because the word conversation keeps coming up to me where I want to try to expose that these conversations exist,
Mm-hmm.
encourage them to happen, but also encourage it to be a two-way dialogue. So the book is really framed for those individuals. You know, it's an empowered approach so that um, the person going through it feels like they have this ability to navigate something that can be quite complex and by the way can be very fueling and all of the good things and use it as this moment that's a great propelling one, but also it's the other side. So by exposing these topics, by giving frameworks, it's exactly like what we're saying, which is the best results come from a dialogue. So I really just wanted to put this on the table, flip the script, change something that's a point of attrition. It's a legit point of attrition. By the way, so is menopause, which is the other huge hot topic right now.
Mm-hmm.
But these points of attrition in the pipeline, particularly for working women, which we know still exists, and flip it. So instead of taboo, I said this the other day to someone, and I really liked it. It was like instead of taboo topics, they're just table stakes. It's normal. 85% of working women will become mothers. It's okay. And by the way, we want to have parents of all genders included in these conversations. I think, you know, we've got to give everyone permission for how they want to have their work and life be integrated.
Yeah, it almost seems surreal that this wasn't already a conversation.
Right.
Like the fact you had to write this book, but also very sad to be honest that that you were in that moment and in one of the toughest moments in your life, and you didn't have a community or a space to have those conversations, right? And now you've helped create that
Thanks.
for which is amazing. Honestly, you should be very proud
Thank you.
of yourself. And I think we need to get this into as many hands as possible, many men's hands as
Yeah.
possible. Like I learned so much, and like I learned so much from my wife and going through that process. Nothing can prepare you for
No.
it, by the way. Going through those moments in life, but having a community, having a safe space to have conversations, the language, like you said, to have the conversations, because a lot of people, they don't want to say something in case they say something wrong. They want to offend
Totally.
you, say the wrong thing, right? So they say nothing at all, but that's also part of the problem as well. So honestly, really, really happy for you and really excited to share it with our community. And I appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you for the space, for the conversation, and everything that you've created. It's so important. And for new HR leaders like me, it's a gift. So thank you so much.
No, I love it. Where can people grab a copy of the book? Where's the best place to send everyone?
Yes. Well, you can visit Carrie Strong Project. That's the website for the book, and you'll see several of the booksellers. It's available wherever books are sold. But also, you can listen to it, or you can have it on your Kindle. So e-readers, Audible, and also the Real Deal.
Amazing.
One thing that's kind of cool in the book, I encourage those of you uh, to do have the physical book. Is the first page actually says "pass it on." So if
Oh,
you
cool.
um, one of the most important points for me of this entire book is that people don't feel alone and they feel supported. So even, you know, you're listening to this for your wife or your friend or your colleague, you sign your name and you share it with your support. So you're basically saying like, I get it, I'm here for you, this is for you. And the goal would be someday if I see a book that has a ton of signatures, I'll be pretty darn
I
proud.
love that because people may have noticed that, but in there was multiple lines, so you can have
Yeah.
multiple people. So by the time it gets to you, you can have that's an incredible idea. I love that.
Much cooler to hand off those books than the ones that like my friends gave me that were, you know, about like breastfeeding and stuff. It was like, thank you very much, giant stack of resource books about, you know, toddler tantrums I will get to later. But
Yeah,
like
yeah,
this,
yeah.
you know,
We all have those in the beginning, right? I didn't get through hardly any of those, and even the ones that I read just still didn't prepare me
like,
for the.
something you do beforehand because after I don't want to put any extra work on your plate.
No, no, no. And did you say carry strong project?
Yes.
Is that .com?
Yes.com.
Great. So as always, for anyone listening right now, the link's in the description. So make sure you go grab a copy of the book there. Also, make sure you connect on LinkedIn. You're on LinkedIn, right? So I think that's probably a good place. I know you post some great articles there and post there. So make sure you follow there. And I wish you all the best until we next speak. All right. See ya.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.